गुड मॉर्निंग मेरे प्यारे बच्चों। हमारा आज का टॉपिक रहेगा एसेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन इन राइजोपस। ठीक है बच्चों, और क्वेश्चन कुछ इस तरह से आ सकता है, डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन, डिस्क्राइब एसेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन इन राइजोपस। और कई बारी थोड़ा सा एग्जामिनर थोड़ा सा हल्का सा घुमा के क्वेश्चन डाल सकता है कि डिस्क्राइब एसेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन इन अ फंगस कॉल्ड ब्लैक माउल्ड और ब्रेड माउल्ड। ठीक है बच्चों, तो राइजोपस is the fungus which is called a bread mold because it likes to grow on stale bread, although it grows on a variety of substances, the edible items. Okay, and it is also called, rhizopus is also called black mold because the outer wall of the sporangiosspores formed, they have a pigment which is found in humans, in us also, and with that pigment is responsible for a black complexion in humans. ठीक है, जैसे कुछ डार्क स्किन पीपल होते हैं। ठीक है, एंड दैट पिगमेंट इज कॉल्ड मेलानिन। तो इसको अच्छे से याद रखना है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों। ठीक है, दैट पिगमेंट इज कॉल्ड मेलानिन एंड दैट इज प्रेजेंट इन आउटर सेल वॉल or outer wall called exine of sporangiospores along with the normal chemicals which are chitin and chitosan. ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों। So during favorable conditions, rhizopus commonly reproduces asexually by formation of minute non-motile, means non-flagellated multinucleate spores called sporangiospores, and which are non-motile, thus called aplanospores, and these are formed inside a sac-like structure or inside sac-like structures called a sporangia, and these sporangia in turn are formed on special hyphal branches which grow vertically upwards just opposite to the rhizoidal hyphae, and these hyphae are called sporangiophores. So during asexual reproduction, what happens? The stoloniferous hyphae come out onto surface. Okay, when these are growing vegetatively, these are present beneath substratum. But when this fungus reproduces asexually, the stoloniferous hyphae come out onto surface, whereas the rhizoidal hyphae, they remain subterranean or beneath the substratum. And these stoloniferous hyphae grow horizontally and produce special branches or the hyphae called sporangiophores. And sporangiophores are unbranched in majority of the cases. ठीक है, unbranched and formed in cluster, they are never formed singly. ठीक है, they are formed in a group just opposite to rhizoidal hyphae on upper side, which grows vertically upwards and produces sporangium at tip or produce sporangia at tip. So this is the first structure you have to draw. In fact, this is the last structure बच्चों। ठीक है, इसके बाद मैं स्पोरेंजियम फॉर्मेशन एंड दस द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ स्पोर्स सबसे पहले मैं आपको इमेजेस की मदद से समझाऊंगा। ठीक है, वो डायग्राम्स आप लोगों ने ड्रा कर लेना है, एंड दिस इज आल्सो द मस्ट डू डायग्राम जब एसेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन वाला क्वेश्चन आएगा। ठीक है, व्हाट डू यू सी हियर? वी कैन सी थ्री टाइप्स ऑफ hyphae or the fungal branches. Primarily there were only two types of fungal hyphae which were horizontally growing stoloniferous hyphae and branched short rhizoidal hyphae. But when it reproduces asexually, these produce in a group specially upright unbranched structures called sporangiophores just opposite to rhizoidal hyphae. ठीक है, and these sporangiophores then produce sporangia and thus sporangiospores, which are in fact एप्लेनोस्पोर्स और नॉन फ्लैजिलेटेड स्पोर्स। ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, अब एक और चीज बताऊंगा, दिस इज यंगेस्ट वन, ठीक है, develop here and finally they produce spores and finally the sporangial wall breaks up and spores are released. So we will deal with the development of these sporangiophores and the sporangia through images one by one. What happens? A material starts rushing or the cytoplasm starts rushing toward the tip of each of the sporangiophore along with food material and many nuclei. ये याद रखना मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, many nuclei. As a result, the terminal portion of sporangiophore swells up and enlarges in size and becomes globular. ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, अब आगे बढ़ने से पहले एक और फैक्ट फाइल बता देना चाहूंगा। जो राइजोपस का थैलस होता है, माइसीलियम, उसका जो साइटोप्लाज्म होगा बच्चों, दैट इज सेड टू बी अ वैक्यूलेटेड साइटोप्लाज्म, मींस द साइटोप्लाज्म ऑफ mycelium and thus the fungal hyphae, they have a large number of small sap vacuoles, thus the cytoplasm appears vacuolated. ठीक है बच्चों, तो ये फैक्ट याद रखना है। So what happens next? When the terminal portion grows in size, enlarges and becomes globular, the cytoplasm in this terminal swollen portion gets differentiated into two zones. How these get differentiated into two zones? What happens bachcho? All the nuclei, they are shifted to upper peripheral portion. Thus the upper dome shaped peripheral portion, it becomes more dense, and this portion or this zone or this region of cytoplasm is called sporoplasm, whereas many vacuoles accumulate in the lower region of this terminal globular swollen portion, and thus this lower portion is called a vacuolated cytoplasm or columella cytoplasm. ठीक है बच्चों, ये याद रखना है। इनफैक्ट दीज वैक्यूल्स दे आर एक्सटेंडेड डाउनवर्ड्स आल्सो बच्चों, ठीक है, लेकिन यहां पर मैंने बनाना जरूरी नहीं समझा है, ठीक है, क्योंकि पूरा का पूरा माइसीलियम का जो थैलस होता है वो वैक्यूलेटेड होता है बच्चों, ठीक है। एंड देन व्हाट हैपेंस दैट these vacuoles get arranged between the boundary of upper sporoplasm and lower vacuolated cytoplasm or the columella cytoplasm. So this is next image which you have to draw. This is upper sporoplasm and this is lower vacuolated cytoplasm or columella cytoplasm. So the vacuoles get arranged in the region between these two zones of cytoplasm, and then these vacuoles diffuse, they fuse up laterally, and thus they make a septum between two zones of cytoplasm. ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, in the meantime what happens मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, the cytoplasm breaks into many pieces. Cytoplasm breaks into many pieces, each piece enclosing many nuclei. ये याद रखना बच्चों, each cytoplasmic piece encloses many nuclei, and in future this will give rise to minute sporangiospores, aplanospores, which are multinucleate. ठीक है बच्चों, and then what happens, each of the cytoplasmic piece synthesizes its own cell wall, its own two-layered cell wall consisting of inner thin flexible intine, smooth intine, and outer thick, tough, but smooth wall layer called exine or exospore, enclosing many nuclei inside, get differentiated into the asexual spore of Rhizopus, which are globular, minute, round, non-flagellated, multinucleated structures. ठीक है प्यारे बच्चों? And then what happens? The freshly formed septum के दोनों तरफ में a fresh wall is synthesized so that this terminal hemispherical or this dome shaped converted dome shaped structure gets differentiated into a sporangium, whereas the lower portion, which remains in continuity with the rest of the thallus, it gets differentiated into a structure called columella. ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों? अब एक बात आगे बढ़ने से पहले एक बात मैं बता देना चाहूंगा। जब यहां पर वेक्यूल्स अरेंज हुए थे, ठीक है, और जब उसके बाद इन्होंने अगले स्टेप में जाके लेटरली फ्यूज हो गए थे और एक सेप्टम बनाया था। व्हाट इज दैट स्ट्रक्चर रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर फॉर्मेशन ऑफ सेप्टम? वी ऑल नो दैट मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, दैट वैक्यूल कंसिस्ट ऑफ टू पार्ट्स। वन इज द टोनोप्लास्ट विच इज द कवर ऑफ वैक्यूल, and one is the fluid present inside. Now we talk about the membrane of vacuole, which is called tonoplast. In fact, it consists of a phospholipid bilayer. मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, ठीक है, और जो phospholipid bilayer within the cell है, जो phospholipid bilayer system है, it keeps on disassociating and reassociating. ये फैक्ट हमेशा याद रखना है बच्चों, ठीक है बच्चों? तो इसका क्या मतलब हुआ कि बहुत सारे छोटे छोटे वैक्यूल्स, सेफ वैक्यूल्स लेटरली डिफ्यूज हो गए। इसका मतलब यह हुआ कि उनका जो प्लाज्मा, जो मेम्ब्रेन है, फॉस्फोलिपिड बाइलेयर है, वो डिफ्यूज हो गया, ठीक है, वो डिफ्यूज हो गया और उसने कंटिन्यूअस क्लेफ्ट बना दिया, ठीक है। फिर उसके बाद एक वॉल सिंथेसाइज हो जाता है, सो दैट वी गेट आ टर्मिनल, या तो हम इसको क्रिसेंट शेप भी बोल सकते हैं बच्चों, है ना। जब हम मून देखते हैं, कई बार फुल होता है, कई बार ये इस तरह का कटा हुआ दिखता है, तो ठीक है, तो क्रिसेंट स्ट्रक्चर भी बोल सकते हैं, ठीक है। सो दैट टर्मिनल स्ट्रक्चर गेट्स डिफरेंशिएटेड इनटू स्पोरेंजियम, enclosing numerous minute non-motile multinucleated structures called sporangiospores, which are aplanospores and which have a melanin present in their outer cell wall called exine or exospore. That is why the fungus is called black mold. ठीक है बच्चों? Once the spores are formed, more material rush toward the tip of sporangiophores. As a result, the size of columella increases. That increase in size of columella exerts pressure on sporangium, so that sporangial wall disrupts. It breaks into pieces irregularly. Okay, there is no definite pattern of breakdown of sporangial wall. Rather, they break irregularly, and our sporangiospores are liberated. You can see here I have drawn many nuclei in blue color. ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, and these structures, because enclose food material and have a thick exine, these are perinating structures, ठीक है, and on approach of a favorable periods, it germinates by giving out a germ tube, and that germ tube is nothing but a tubular extension of a inner wall layer of sporangiospore, which is called intine, and thus it germinates on getting a suitable substratum, and that substratum is rich in dead organic matter, and it produces a new vegetative mycelium which consists of two parts, two different type of hyphae. One is stoloniferous hyphae and one is a rhizoidal hyphae. So this is it about the asexual reproduction. Now I will read slides one by one, my dear students. During the process, cytoplasm rushes toward the tip of a sporangiophore along with many nuclei. याद रखना बच्चों. As a result, tip swells up and becomes more or less spherical in shape. Now, in this terminal swollen portion, nuclei shift to upper peripheral region so that cytoplasm gets differentiated into two zones. And what are those two zones, bachcho? Upper sporoplasm and lower vacuolated cytoplasm or columella cytoplasm. That is upper peripheral dense cytoplasm having large number of nuclei and reserve food and is called sporoplasm, and lower less dense cytoplasm called vacuolated cytoplasm that contains large number of small sap vacuoles and very less number of nuclei. A large number of sap vacuoles arrange themselves between the two zones of cytoplasm, that is upper sporoplasm and lower vacuolated cytoplasm. Fuse laterally. Fuse laterally का मतलब क्या हुआ बच्चों? The phospholipid bilayer fuses and makes a continuous cleft and makes a dome-shaped septum between the two cytoplasms. A fresh wall is synthesized around the septum so that upper sporoplasm gets delimited from rest of the thallus, while the lower portion, which is called columella, it remains in continuity with rest of the thallus. This freshly formed dome-shaped structure just below sporoplasm is known as columella, which remains in continuation with rest of the thallus. Cytoplasm of sporoplasm breaks into many pieces, each piece enclosing many nuclei. It secretes their own cell wall, and cell wall is two-layered. Again, I will repeat. Inner wall is called intine, which is very thin, flexible, smooth, whereas the outer wall is called exine, which is rough and tough, very thick but smooth. And it becomes, thus the resultant structure becomes a minute, round, non-motile or non-flagellated, multinucleated spore. And because it is non-motile, thus it is also called an aplanospore. Cell wall consists of two layers: outer thick, rough, tough, rigid, smooth, exine, and inner thin, smooth, and flexible, intine. Along with the normal chemicals, which is in the form of a polymer of N-acetyl glucosamine. One is chitin and one is chitosan. Both of these chemicals are the main constituents of the wall of Rhizopus. Thus, in fact, these are the main constituent of cell wall of majority of the members of subdivision Zygomycotina. ठीक है? Outer wall layer contains a black pigment called melanin, which is responsible for black color of the spore, and thus Rhizopus is called a black mold. Why बच्चों? Because these black colored spores, exine में color black है, तो हम ऐसे बोल सकते हैं these black colored spores are produced in a huge number and cover the entire substratum on which it is growing. Thus, the substratum of that organic material appears black in color. That is why Rhizopus is called black mold or bread mold, or sometimes it can also be called black bread mold. Once the spores are formed inside that terminal sporangium, more cytoplasm rushes toward the tip of sporangiophore, which results in increase in size of columella. This increase in size of columella exerts pressure on sporangial wall. As a result, sporangial wall breaks into irregular pieces and the spores are liberated. And because spores store a good quantity of food and they have a very resistant, very rough and tough, durable outer wall called exile, these perinate and function as resting spore. बच्चों है ना, सिंपली सेइंग दिस कैन बी कॉल्ड रेस्टिंग स्पोर. जिस भी स्पोर का वायबिलिटी पीरियड लंबा होगा उसका एक वजह ये रहेगा कि एक तो इसके पास बहुत ज्यादा फूड स्टोर रहेगा, दूसरा इसके पास एक थिक कपड़ा रहेगा. कपड़ा और रोटी दोनों रहेगा मिस्टर चतुर्वेदी. These spores being thick walled can pass over unfavorable periods, that means can behave as a resting spore, and on approach of favorable conditions they germinate by giving out a germ tube, and that germ tube is nothing but the tubular extension of the inner wall layer, which is in time. So this is it bachcho. This was our today's topic. Tomorrow we will deal with the sexual reproduction in Rhizopus. एक रिक्वेस्ट करता हूं मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, एक बारी सरसरी नजर मार लेना है ना. मैं रोज में भूल जाता हूं, हालांकि आप लोगों को खुद चाहिए कि जब ये डिसाइड हो जाता है कि कल का टॉपिक क्या है, तो एक बारी किताब खोल के सरसरी नजर से पढ़ लो. ठीक है बच्चों, अगर आप पर एक बारी पढ़ना जरूर है बच्चों. ठीक है, इससे क्या होता है कि जो नेक्स्ट डे जो फ्रेश लेक्चर हम लोग अटेंड करते हैं, ठीक है, फ्रेश टॉपिक हम डिस्कस करते हैं, उसमें काफी आसानी हो जाती है. ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, तुम कल मिलेंगे नए टॉपिक के साथ. तब तक सुरक्षित रहिए, खाते पीते रहिए, मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंटली पढ़ते रहिए. हैव अ नाइस डे माय डियर स्टूडेंट्स.